the presentation tonight was originally supposed to be how to light buildings. And it was supposed to be a hands-on presentation, and we were going to install lighting in all the Museum of Science buildings. Well, obviously that went out the window when we couldn't do a hands-on. So we decided to stay with the lighting theme and do best practices for lighting a layout. And what we're going to talk about is everything from how to light your workbench, the different lighting that's available out there. Let me get on the right screen here so I can move forward. Here we go. And all the aspects to deal with lighting your layout at home. So let me see here if I can do this. There we go. All right, bear with me one second. I'm just trying to make this easier for myself. All right. So why do we need good lighting? Visually, it lets everyone see the work we do, and we all do some mighty fine work in this group. So you really want to show it off. You can't show it off if you can't see it. Now, agreed, there are parts of our layouts that we don't necessarily want people to see, and we light accordingly. And we'll talk about that as we go as well. Sometimes we need to hide those areas, but most of the time we want a nice light on our layout. Good lighting can add realism, and it can add a sense of time and place to the layout. If it's early morning, the color of the light will look different than it will at high noon. So we want to talk about that a little bit and how that affects our layouts going forward. Many of our layouts are in basements, spare rooms, attics. We live in New England, most of us, and a few others that don't now, but we still have these type of spaces. And of course, these spaces are not well lit, generally speaking, until we put lighting in those places. So we're going to talk about how to do that as well. So where do we begin? Well, we begin with what is light, because you need to understand what light is to learn how to use it correctly in your layouts. So light, or visible light, is electromagnetic radiation within the portion of the electromagnetic spectrum that can be perceived by the human eye. Now, that's a lot of big words. That basically says it's all the light that we can physically see. So when we look at visible light, it's actually, if you look at it, it's a very small portion of the entire light electromagnetic spectrum. So we have AM, shortwave, TV, FM, radar, X-rays, gamma rays, and visible light is just this little tiny slice that allows us to see between all that. Another way to look at it, when you look at visible light, it is about midway on the wavelength. Shorter wavelengths have more power, thus why we use X-rays to look at our body, because it can penetrate better. Whereas infrared has a very, very long wavelength. Microwave is even longer, but it has very little energy. Now, that's relatively speaking little energy. But this is why on the front of your microwave, you've got a mesh screen that allows you to look in at your food while it's cooking without injuring you, because that mesh screen is smaller than the wavelength for a microwave. Thus, it can't come out. So that's why we do that. But visible light, except when you get near the very edges, where we get into infrared and UV, is safe for us to see. Another way to look at this, and this will be the last way, is this blob that you see in here is actually all the known colors that we can reproduce. In the old days, our TVs used to be able to reproduce what's in this blue triangle. That was it. So all of these other colors that were outside of the blue triangle, our TVs didn't reproduce. Now, if you've got one of those high definition, high dynamic range, 4K, 8K super duper TVs, you can now reproduce colors as big as this red or this yellow triangle. And you can see that that's still not even every color, but it's almost 2 to 3 times more than what we used to be able to do, because this is partially logarithmic as well. So there is some huge difference between this point and this point. So we can see a lot more light now than we used to. Light itself is still made up primarily of red, green, and blue. This is going back to our kindergarten days, right? White's in the middle. Yellows, cyans, magentas are made out of combinations of light. So we talk about color temperature, or the color of the light. Color temperature is measured in degrees Kelvin, or K. So 1,000 Kelvin is a much more orangey red light. So this is on one end of the color spectrum. And then as we warm up, or the use of the term warm up or cool down, depending on how you want to look at it, we go up in degrees Kelvin, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. So when you're looking at a package of light bulbs, and those light bulbs say they're daylight 5,000 or they're soft white 3,000, what they're referring to is where in this scale that light falls. So as we get further up towards daylight, you get up into the 8,000, 9,000. As you get up towards sunrise and sunset, you're getting closer to this 1,000, 2,000 color temperature. And if we were to actually put a light bulb at each of those color temperatures, you'll see it really is pretty dramatic color difference. The middle ones are a little tougher to see the difference. And for the most part, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 are fairly interchangeable to the naked eye. It would be really difficult to discern those. But as you get down into 3,000, 2,000, we get that soft white, they call it, or yellow light, whereas 8,000 or 9,000 is more that harsh light. And where this comes into play is if we look at a typical sunrise to sunset day, in the morning, our sun starts out in that 2,000 range. And then by mid-morning, we're in that 3,500 to 4,500. By high noon, we're at 5,500 to 6,500, sometimes 8,000, depends on the day, the location, proximities, there's a number of factors. And then as the evening starts to come by, we start to get warmer again until you get into the evening. And then you always hear about photographers talking about golden hour, when they always want to take pictures because it's the best time of the day to take pictures. Well, what they're talking about is they're talking about this slice right here just before sunset, just as it's about to go away. That's when it's the warmest, that yellow glow that gives them the best pictures. The other interesting thing about color perception is that depending upon the colors around it, you will perceive these colors differently to the naked eye. So if you look, as I change through this slide and change the color around the border, you will actually see those lights change in your perception as to what colors they really are, whether they're more red, more blue, more green, and which ones stand out more. So it's just, there's a lot of factors that come into this that affect it. So again, we're looking at candlelight down at this end, moonlight down in here, warm whites, extra warm whites or yellows, daylight. Overcast skies are actually fairly bright because the sun bounces off the underside of the clouds. Blue sky, you're in Hawaii, you're in the Caribbean, you get that really brilliant blue color that's in that 8,000 range. So that's kind of cool. You've got all these color temperatures. So I've got a few examples I found. So this one is a multi-layer layout, but one of the things that caught my eye was that they've got a very white light up here, a much more yellow light going on down here, and a whole different color light going on over here. So more than likely, they're using fluorescence on the upper area, incandescent lighting on the lower area, and maybe fluorescent over here. So it's a little bit distracting to see all those different colors as you go around the layout. Here's another example. This is obviously the upper level of a layout. Here's the ceiling. I love that they painted the clouds and the sky, but you can see the ceiling lights are basically not over the layout. They're out here. And because of that, they're getting very harsh white light, dark shadow, white light, dark shadows all the way around the room because they're not able to light this evenly. Here's an example where they have too much light on the layout. In conjunction with the very light color, really makes the stuff start to look lost in the scenery. It doesn't pop. There's a little bit too much light here in this example. Now, I'm not saying they operate this way, but in the picture that they took, this is what they're seeing. And this is actually the MR&T layout in Milwaukee. And even these guys had trouble with their lighting. So they went with a 2x2 grid. So they've got a 4-foot fluorescent, then they've got a blank hole of 4 feet, then a 4-foot fluorescent, then a 4-foot hole. And what they end up with, you can see again, is this bright light, dark light, bright light, dark light, all the way down the layout. The good news is we don't need to do that anymore. Things have improved dramatically, and we can now fix a lot of these issues. I will say, even with this brighter light, the darker fascia and the black curtain help make the layout itself pop more. And we'll show examples of that with a valance and how that helps affect that as well. So going back to our light chart, what color temperature it is really does affect what you see in the scenery and the color of the scenery, the color of your trains. So now what do we do? Well, key points to remember when thinking about layout, lighting, color. What time of day are you modeling? Nighttime, morning, mid-afternoon, multiple times. Maybe your lights are on a timer tied to your fast clock. As the morning starts out, it's a little dimmer. And then as it goes through the fast clock day, the light gets brighter and then gets dimmer again on the layout. These are all fairly simple things to do nowadays. Years ago, that was a lot of work. Now we can do this pretty quickly. So if you like lighting interiors of buildings, street lamps, traffic lights, and you want that work to be visible, then maybe modeling high noon is not going to be your best option, because it's basically going to get washed out. If you tend to make your lighting more morning or evening dusk light, you're going to get a much more subdued light, and your detailing is going to pop much more on the layout. On the other hand, let's say you're not a detail kind of person. Maybe you're more operations oriented and you want nice bright lights so you can read your cards, so you can see all the train car numbers and read them from a distance. In that case, yeah, maybe a more high noon lighting template is more appropriate for that. Although if you have dark corners, that could be interesting as well. So I'll take a break here for a second. If there's any questions, anybody have some questions on this so far? Does this make sense? Oh, we got some questions. All right. Eric, could you unmute, please?
You can just click on your name to click on your button to unmute yourself. I don't.
Oh, okay.
Chase you down.
James, you want to go first there?
Oh, me?
I was just going to say, I'm sitting here in my layout room, which I've lit with a combination of pretty good color rendering index fluorescence and 5000K LEDs. And if anybody wants to see that at some point during this, my webcam is not awfully good, but you can get a general feel for it, those of you who haven't seen my layout.
Yeah, I'm gonna go over the different types of bulbs and different color temperature bulbs and options here in the next section. So we'll get back to it. Ted, you had a question? Unmute, Ted. Unmute yourself.
Yes. How does what you have told us affected by those of us who are green deficient?
Okay, so
Colorblind, but it isn't color blindness. It's just that pure
it's
green.
Yeah. So our eyes are most sensitive in the green range and less sensitive in the blues and the reds. So one of the issues with certain eye types is that they are not as sensitive in the greens, and that skews the color temperatures in your perspective of it. It doesn't necessarily skew it for everybody else, but it will definitely skew your version of it. It's a tough situation to get around, other than to go by a technical chart and say, I've bought this color temperature bulb and I know the result should be this when you look at it. You can correct for it for yourself by changing the color temperature slightly. You'll get a different view of it, but it may look weird to everybody else. One of the examples of that was at the Museum of Science the first year. We had wanted a blue moonlight effect over the layout, and everybody that took out their cameras, all their cameras could not see that color. It was basically an illegal color on their cameras. So everybody got purple moonlight pictures of the layout instead of the blue moonlight that they saw. So physically they saw blue. When they took their camera and took the picture, they got this purple picture because the camera is not as sensitive at certain color points as the human eye. So yes, that can vary greatly from person to person.
So what direction and by how much should I think about altering the color temperature to make it, from what I see, to what would be better for others?
So if you're green deficient, that means you're seeing a more equal amount of green, red, and blue. So you're probably going to want to skew towards either the softer whites or probably towards the softer whites to get more of a color that would seem more normal to you and be still appreciable by everybody else.
Okay, great. Thank
Yes,
you.
James.
Yeah, I
Just
got a
going to
question.
add that Micromark and some other vendors sell RGB LED strips with
Yep, we're going to talk about
basically
that.
an
Yep.
adjustable controller. And it would be easy enough given that to say, these are the color settings I want to have when I'm running trains by myself.
Yep.
And these are the color settings for visitors. And this is what I have to do to make the photographer happy when I'm shot for Model Railroader magazine.
Yeah, I have slides that show that coming up. And, yes, Jim.
Yeah, I got a question for you because you showed on there that some people like to model prototype, which a lot of people like to model prototype. And you had on there like morning, mid-afternoon, night. I don't know if a lot of people realize it, but most of your trains run at night. And when you see a train during the day, that's because he's probably came in and stopped in the yard somewhere at 4 o'clock in the morning after working from 4 o'clock in the afternoon the night before. So it's hard to say how you're gonna model your layout.
Well, and that's the cool thing that we can do now, much, much easier than we used to be able to do. It used to be very difficult to model different times of day and have that lighting change as you model and run your operation. That is a much, much simpler function now with some of the new LED lighting that's out there. And I'll show you some examples of controllers that you can get to help with that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this part?
Shaq, I just want to make a comment. So fun fact, some cell phone cameras don't filter infrared light, and the CCDs are sensitive to infrared, to the point where I did a project where we used infrared LEDs to indicate status, and the way you read the status was you hold your phone up to it and it would light up, but if you didn't have the phone, you couldn't see the lights.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
kind of
so
sneaky, but yeah.
it shows you it's interesting the way it goes. Let me see here. Just make sure I see there's no other questions. There we go.
Oh.
All right, so let's go back to the next section then. Next part of this, if you want to mute everybody and unmute me. Screen 2, share. Everybody should be seeing where we left off. And everybody should still be able to hear me, yes?
Yep.
All right. And so once you've decided on a lighting color or how you want to do the color on your layout, what do you actually use to do that? So we're going to go through the 4 basic types of light bulbs. I know this sounds boring, but this is really actually pretty key to understanding this and how to light your layout. First off, there's an incandescent bulb. This is the standard light bulb that we all grew up with for, almost 100 years now. It's been around, easily available. Most color temperatures were readily available, and they were cheap. I mean, they've gotten to the point where they're dirt cheap, although they have started going up in price again, and I'll tell you why in a second. They are getting harder to find as they have been outlawed and economically outlawed. They're basically going to be gone probably within the next 5 years. you'll have a real hard time finding an incandescent light bulb of the traditional type. The biggest problem for us as model railroaders is they produce a ton of heat. They are one of the hottest bulbs that you can get, not the hottest, but one of the hottest. And they were typically fairly large in size. If you wanted a light bulb that gave you a very large pattern, a big circle of light, you had to get a pretty big light bulb. You had to get almost a spotlight size bulb, which meant you had to put the bulb 10 feet back from your layout to get a nice even light, which then inevitably you stood in front of and got a huge shadow. So not really a bulb we recommend anymore for doing anything like this. There's just better options available. Fluorescent, which is what replaced incandescent in many cases. You have both the compact fluorescent style as well as a traditional, what we call a T5 or a T8, 4-foot fluorescent, 2-foot fluorescents, 8-foot fluorescents. They're abundantly available. They produce a very even amount of light. So when you have an 8-foot fluorescent tube, you get a nice even light across the whole tube, which you don't get as many hot spots, which is nice. They're available in a lot of different color temperatures. They're very easily found in different color temperatures. They're different sizes and shapes to deal with different problems of physical installation. Very low heat output. It is the lowest heat output lamp that you can get, which means by putting in fluorescence, you're never going to melt your scenery. Never going to be a problem. They're also extremely energy efficient. This is why utilities were giving these things away years ago, trying to get you to buy them. Problem with them? We've all had that one buzzy fixture in our house that drove us nuts. My current one is in my kitchen over the sink. I won't even turn it on, it's so bad. Ballasts are a hassle to replace, and nowadays can actually cost more than the light fixture itself, and it's cheaper to replace the whole fixture. They're bad for the environment unless they're recycled properly. The good news is in Massachusetts, anybody that sells fluorescent bulbs is actually required to take fluorescent bulbs back, and you can bring them in, and Home Depot, Lowe's all have a collection area and will accept the bulbs for recycling, and they get properly recycled. So that's something to keep in mind if you are getting rid of them. Halogen bulbs, which is our third type, these are the bulbs that museums used to like to use a lot. They give a very different broad array of styles, shapes, patterns, light outputs. The pros, very small fixture sizes available, extremely bright light. It's a full spectrum of light. Halogen, very similar to an incandescent bulb, provides a full spectrum from end to end of the visible light spectrum in a single bulb, whereas a fluorescent is a much more concentrated strip of that visible light spectrum. The cons, well, heat. They are the hot bulb. They will give you the most heat. You have to be extremely careful where you mount them in relation to your layout. They are actually already banned for sale in Europe and are about to be banned in the US over the next couple of years. So going down the halogen road in the future, probably not a good idea. Which brings us to the LED or the light emitting diode. So this is the light of the future, at least for now. We said that about halogen and fluorescent, but it looks like LEDs are going to stick around for quite a while longer. They're available in every single shape, size, color, width, design, spectrum, whatever you want, from a little tiny LED that fits in the light of our locomotives up to floodlight size. They might look like strip lights like this on a piece of tape. They might be in a tube. They might be puck lights like we've had under our kitchen countertops. The advantage of these, traditionally these used to be halogen to give you a nice white light on your kitchen counters. Now you can do it with LED and nobody gets burned when they get their hand up near it. And your cabinet no longer gets warm underneath. So just about every single size, shape, color, and type is available. In the last couple of years, they're now dimmable. That was a problem when they first came out. That has generally been eliminated, but you do need to read the specific bulb package because it will vary by bulb. So the Pros, available in every size and shape. They're available in most color temperatures. They provide a flat, even light. And I'll put a question mark and an asterisk there because you really got to read the specs on the light. Because LEDs are so controllable in terms of the way that they can output their light, they can form whatever size, shape, pattern, or intensity that the manufacturer desires. So depending upon what type of bulb you buy is going to determine the pattern of light and the type of light that you're going to end up with. Essentially, no heat load to speak of. There is a small heat load with LEDs. It's about 10% of that of a traditional incandescent light bulb. But for our purposes, that's basically nothing. We can have an LED inside our locomotives, in our cars, in our car lighting, our cabooses, and no issues at all. We don't have to worry about melting the plastic, assuming we install it properly. 1 second, James, I see you. Cons, not all are dimmer compatible. Again, need to read the spec. If you're going to turn your lights on a dimmer to dim the room or put them on an automatic controller to run operations in nighttime and daytime on your layout with a fast clock, then you're going to need to make sure that you buy dimmable fixtures. There is an issue with exposure to the blue peaks that can increase the risk of cataracts and age-related molecular degeneration. LEDs are still relatively new, and they are still learning some of the negatives of the LEDs. When we only had red LEDs, it wasn't so much of an issue. Now that we have red, white, blue, green, orange, yellow, and all the colors under the rainbow, they are seeing that some LED lights are not the kind you want to look into directly. So there are potential issues there. So I think we'll take a quick break here. When we come back, and we'll have some discussion here first, but when we come back, we're going to talk about best practice considerations of lighting your layout and workbench. So we'll have some virtual coffee and cookies here, and I'll take some questions. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, just unmute your mic. Happy to answer any questions anybody has. I see James. Unmute. James, unmute.
Software too.
There we go.
Comment on LEDs. The more light you're getting out of a small package in LEDs, the concentrated, very bright things, you have to be careful to keep them cool. They have a thermal budget and they will die if overloaded.
Yep.
The strips where the LEDs are half an inch or more apart, those are much less sensitive to temperature.
Yep. Any other comments, questions? Yes, Russ.
Yeah, I use a lot of small LEDs in track lights to kind of provide focused lighting where I want it, and that works great for LEDs that I'm aware of because they do tend to have more of a beam rather than a broad like you get from a recessed light, fluorescent light, which would cover a wide area. The LEDs are much more narrow in their focus.
I do have some lighting suggestions later in the presentation towards the end here of some of the new LED flat panel lights that can be retrofitted either into your existing can lights or your existing can light spaces, or if you have a ceiling grid, you can just drop them in a 2x2 or 2x4. That's actually what I did in my basement in my train room, and I have pictures of that to show you. And those lights have come a long way. The flatness of the light is much less beam-like and much more dispersed over a very set and specific area. I ended up doing 2x2 beams, squares in my ceiling grid. And you'll see I did every 2 feet. I did every other tile, and that room is lit to the max. I mean, and it is flat lighting throughout the entire room. There's not a shadow to be had coming down from the ceiling, except over the workbench where I put an extra light to make sure I had tons of lighting over my workbench area. So I'll show you those pictures in the next part of the presentation. But that's, yeah, there's a couple of options out there now that you can use to either retrofit your existing fixtures, or you can literally almost screw into your existing bulbs, and will give you a much flatter and broader beam than they used to have even a year or two ago. I've been really amazed at some of the advances and how quick they've come along.
The issue with LEDs in working in light fixtures is that you've got a problem with LEDs only work on direct current, right? And of course your line voltage is AC, and so they have to put circuitry in place to control the voltage, control the current. And it can also, and that can create, depending on the circuit design, you don't know what it is, but that can create flicker because they're very fast little switches, so they can flicker with the AC line current, and manufacturers have to do some work to fix that or to compensate.
And again, they're making huge strides now. But what Eric's alluding to is a lot of the cheaper lights, in order to create DC, if we have a typical sine wave for AC, they just basically half rectify it and take the top half or the bottom half, and that's how they're getting their DC. And by doing that, you actually end up with an on-off situation. Now, it may not necessarily be visible to the naked eye, but it can be if they've done a poor job of it. So the quality of the circuit that they use behind the LED can make a big difference. One of the nice things, though, we have now is with things like Amazon and a very liberal return policy at most of their vendors. You can buy a fixture, test it, go, yeah, no, and put it back in the envelope, and they'll come pick it up and send it back, and you buy a different one from a different manufacturer. I've done that myself a couple of times with a number of products. And with my ceiling fixtures, I ended up swapping them out twice before I got the ones I really liked that gave me the kind of light I wanted, the style I wanted, the color I wanted, the ability to change color, the ability to dim them so that they can be work lights or they can be operating lights depending upon how I want to use them. So there's a lot of options out there, and we'll talk about some of those physical fixture options, some of the ones that I've played with that you can look up and how to look them up and tell what you're looking at. But yeah, that's a good point, Eric. There are some cheap ones out there, and you'll be very disappointed. So don't expect the first fixture you buy to replace it to be the winner every time. It may not be.
I've had that issue with strip lights where you buy a roll of LEDs on a strip, and if you buy 5 rolls, then only 2 will look the same. It's just and you just send the other ones back, and you buy.
Yep, and you buy more. But on the other hand, you can buy 80-something feet of strip lights, which is enough to do a pretty good sized shelf layout, multiple levels, and that's like $35 on Amazon right now, and it's fully color correctable. It has a red, a green, and a blue knob, and you can set it for any color temperature you want and save presets. And I'll show you some examples of that in the slides coming up as well. So,
good stuff.
Yeah, there's just so many options that weren't available even a couple of years ago now that really have changed how we think about lighting for a model layout. There's really no excuse anymore in a new layout or a rebuilt layout to not have nice, even color lighting throughout the entire display, top and bottom, not just nice lighting up top and some Christmas tree lights underneath anymore. You can get LED lighting for a fraction of what the Christmas tree lights even used to cost you. So you can get really nice light for a really low cost. And any other questions, comments, thoughts?
Got a question from James. He's got his hand up for a while.
Yeah, I noticed on your LEDs, it's funny. I don't know if there's any pricing for them because I see the Christmas tree, the new Christmas trees came out, and they got the new LEDs, but you can't find any replacement bulbs anywhere.
No, and you'll find that many of them are not dimmable either, because
Right.
of the type of bulbs they're using and their design. I would not recommend using the LED Christmas lights, other than if you just want a light to stick up inside every building on your layout, and you just want to throw the lights down the line. It's a good, quick way to throw lights in your buildings at a pretty low cost. You can buy an LED strip for $4, and you can light 100 buildings with it. But you know, it may not be dimmable, it may not be controllable, and if a bulb burns out, yeah, you're throwing the whole string away at this point. They really are not replaceable at this stage, because every manufacturer is doing it slightly different, from string to string even.
So are you trying to tell me that if one bulb burns out on a Christmas tree, you got to throw the whole Christmas tree out for one bulb?
Oh, no, not on your Christmas tree, but on your layout. If 2 or 3 of them burn out in a row, that could be a real problem.
Oh,
And
yeah,
you'd have
Ken.
to pull the whole string out to replace it, as opposed to something else. Now,
Right.
so,
Right.
you know, just something to keep in mind. And again, there's some better options for not much more money that are much more stable than the Christmas tree light strings are.
Okay.
But I've used those. We use them actually at the Museum of Science. We use LED Christmas lights to light up buildings, because it was quick, it was easy, and in the G-scale buildings, it was perfect. It was just the amount of light we wanted.
Wow.
So it does work. I'm not going to tell you don't use it, but there's some better options for permanent layouts.
Right.
Yeah, the
What you
only
were saying,
one
what
positive.
you were saying about half wave rectification, you just cut it in half. I've used that sometimes in locomotives,
Mm.
where I'm connecting an LED to the decoder, and rather than having 2 wires run from the tender to the locomotive, I just have the blue wire run, and then the white wire run, and then the other side of the LED I connect to the shell of the locomotive, and it returns it to the track. So you're really only illuminating half the time, but you never see it. Your eye can't see the on off. It's too fast.
But yeah, especially in the tiny lights, I think Eric, correct me, but when they're that small, you usually can't tell. When you start putting in 40 or 50 of them, or even 10 in a fixture, in a single bulb, and you try to play that, you start to see more issues. Now, some of the manufacturers have gotten around that by taking that half wave rectification and putting half the bulbs on one half of the wave and half the bulbs on the other half, so that in theory, it's still flickering, but it's flickering on between the 2 sides. Okay, it's one way of addressing it in a small fixture, but you technically, if you were to look at it with a camera, you possibly would still see some significant flickering. And again, it depends on the manufacturer. Some are better than others.
In the locomotive case, that's running like an 8 kilohertz DCC line, not 60 hertz line rate.
Right.
That's why you can't see that.
Yeah, it's not nearly as bad.
Mr. Van Bokkelen, you had your hand up a bit for a while ago. Do you have a question?
I was just going to say the strip LED lights, the simple ones, avoid a lot of the power supply problems or the power supply sensitivity problems, because you've got a power brick, and those, power bricks for PCs and this thing, that thing, the other thing, they are pretty near the top of the learning curve. You buy them, they work. If something fails about them, like a lightning strike, you can get another one. But one of the things you lose is the flexibility of multiple colors and the ability to dim, but you get that simplicity. And since you're doing everything at 12 volts and you only need to connect 2 wires, I just solder lamp cord between segments of light strips in my layout, and that do whatever
the
I
LED
want,
light
as long
strips,
as I keep the polarities straight.
Yeah,
when
the
they
LED
fail,
light
they'll
strips
fail in
have really
sections of 3,
changed.
because they've got 1 LED or 3 LEDs across the 12 volts per chunk.
Right.
Yeah, the LED light strips really have simplified using LEDs for general layout lighting. They're very unobtrusive. They give a nice even light, and I'll show you some examples of layouts and how that changes how you mount that light under your layout as well in the next section. Yes, Andy.
We've talked about ways of sort of using other types of bulbs and LEDs and what have you, where Woodland Scenics, for instance, has a whole lighting system.
I have that in a slide coming up.
Comment on that.
Yep, I do have a slide on that in the next part. We talk about some of these options, and yes, their system is very slick. Somebody has done a very good job of simplifying the process and providing timing modules and expansion, and truly is a plug and play system. And I do cover that in the next part of the presentation.
Okay.
Bruce talked about that last month.
Yeah. Any other questions? Otherwise, we can either take a quick break or I can move on to the next section, however you guys feel. We're doing pretty good on time, so up to you. It sounds like everybody wants to just sit, and we'll move on to the next one. Okay. Eric, if you would.
I'm just meeting people individually. Just go ahead.
All right, so we're back to our break here. So let's talk about workbench lighting for a second, and then we'll finish off with layout lighting and some examples. So what do we want on our workbench? We want bright, even light, right? Because you want to be able to see everything. We don't want to be working in a dark hole. We want a bench that's evenly lit from side to side. We don't want the light so close that it's blocking us from doing the work. We want to be able to have it up high enough so that it's a nice clean light. This is one of the most fantastic bench lights I have ever seen. And I have another example of this. This is LED strip light mounted to a piece of aluminum so that it's curved over the bench. The light that this produces, I am building one of these for myself after I saw this. This is fantastic. Very even light. If you're working on a building, it's 3D light because it lights it from the side, from the top, from the front. Great light to work on three-dimensional objects, which is what we do when we work on model trains. So fantastic idea. Doesn't take up a ton of space on your bench. It's a very small footprint on the bench for a very large amount of light. Now, it doesn't mean you're still not going to need a little close-up bulb or a halogen bulb or something to get that little bit of closer light. But for a generic light to light the bench, fantastic. This is another good example of a well-lit bench. And the reason I say that is because there's nice even light from end to end of the bench area, but yet the computer screens are protected from that light. So one of the things to keep in mind is you don't want to just put the light on your bench and have so much glare that when you sit there with your PC trying to follow along or program or do something like that, you want to make sure that the light is not on your screens. And this goes true for a dispatch position or anywhere else. You want to have the light on your work area, not on your screens. That's important for eye fatigue. Most of us have a light similar to this. If you're over 25, you'll need a light similar to this at some point. These things are fantastic. They make them now in both fluorescent and now LED rings. They got your magnifier built in. You get your light ring right around it. When you're trying to work, I don't think I have found a better light yet for doing close-up work and putting couplers and things like that in detail, handrails and grab irons and stuff. It just doesn't get any easier, short of wearing zoom glasses on your face and using cheaters. Again, lots of different styles, shapes, colors, but they really make it easy to see what you're doing. Here's another example similar to that last one with the LED strip lights. And you can see with the box that he's working on here, you can see every side of it has got light on it. So if I were weathering a building or something, this is a great way to do that. It really, really works well. And again, very small footprint, just a little piece of angle iron on each end of the bench where it attaches. and then it's pretty much completely up and out of your way. You could have tools behind it. You could have a paint spray booth behind it. You would have no issues working with that. So nice even light, that's our key feature when you're with a workbench. You want to limit shadows, right? We don't want to have shadows on the bench because you lose parts in shadows. If your bench looks like this, no matter what kind of light you use, I can't help you. You've got to start somewhere on that before we can even talk about light. So I'm not sure what modeling gets done on that bench, but boy, that's got to be tough. If it's somebody's in the club, I apologize, but it was the best example I could find. So here's another bench somebody had on their training bench. So again, they've got a little bit of a fluorescent here. They're mostly using room light, but one of the disadvantages they have is they have a black workbench, and black absorbs light. It doesn't reflect it. So they're not getting any benefit from the light up above to reflect back on their work by having the black bench. Another bench, this is a bench with a small traditional fluorescent lamp over it or incandescent over it. Again, hot spot, very dark, much harder to use. The light's reflecting on the screen. You can see it bouncing off the screen, which is going to make your eye fatigue later. So you really want to think about screens. I do like that he's got the screen mounted up away onto the wall. If he had a keyboard tray here, that would really clear a lot of bench out for him or her. Again, I don't even know how you use the mouse buried up underneath all that. So, you know, those things clear that bench to make that light more useful. Here's an example of a bench with the layout above it. A lot of us have this style where we stick a bench underneath. The good news is he's got a nice white bench, so he's capturing as much light on the bench area as possible. But the area that he's actually, or she is working in, is only under the general room light. And there's no other light hitting the bench. And you can see just even here, that's making this very difficult to see things, to tell what you have even on the bench in the dark shadows. You really need some more light on there to make that useful. So independently controllable. There's nothing worse than your engine breaks down in the middle of an ops session and you walk over to your workbench and you turn the entire room light on, because that's the only way you can turn the bench light on to work on the locomotive. So have your bench lights on a separate switch, have them in a separate controller so that you can actually work at a bench independently of what's going on in the rest of your train room. Theoretically, you should be able to have the same color temperature as the layout on your bench, or changeable as needed. So if your layout is, let's say, 3000 degrees Kelvin or more towards the soft white side, I would want to make sure I have soft white light available at my workbench so that when I'm painting and detailing models, I'm looking at it in the light that it's actually going to appear under on the layout. Now, you may want bright white LEDs to actually do the work, but you may need to be able to turn those off. One bench that I saw, a gentleman had a foot switch so that he could turn the LED overhead lights on and off over the bench and just have the soft lights. This way, he didn't even have to reach over with his hands to do anything. He could just sit and look at the model, and then when he needed to actually detail it, he could click the white lights on, do his detail, click the white lights, and back again see his soft light. That was a really neat way to do it. We forget that our feet are useful sometimes for stuff like that. You were asking earlier about color temperature, being able to control the color of the lights. Many controllers are available now with these RGB knobs. You put them in line with the LED lights, and you can actually set the color of the light to any color you want. The fancier controllers, some of them now also might be a remote control you can walk around with. Some of them allow you to do presets and select between the presets. Excuse me one second. So you can choose the color that you want. Once you have it, save it as a preset button so that you can go from night to day and back to night, or back to day as your operating session continues, depending upon how fancy a lighting controller you want to go with. And because they're LED, they're usually 10 volt, low voltage control. There's a number of Arduino solutions out there that can accomplish that preset switching. very, very easily. So once you have the control, you can do things like that. So this is actually my basement layout room to be, I should say. It's in process. I was lucky enough when I bought the house to have about a 14 by 14 foot room. I negotiated land rights outside of the room for additional layout space. But in the room itself, it was actually originally a 2 foot by 4 foot grid. And I went and I bought the pieces to make it into a 2 foot by 2 foot grid. And then I painted the grid black. So this is right after I installed the 2 footers, but before I decided I was going to make them black. So I then had to go back and repaint them again. Just painted them with a latex paint because I wanted a little more detail on the ceiling. But the reason to go with the 2 foot by 2 foot was I wanted more control over the positioning of my lights in my space. Now, not everything in the ceiling when I found it was up to code. When you buy a used house, this is sometimes what you find. So it turns out the 2 ceiling lights that I thought were 4x8 shop fixtures were actually a shop fixture plugged into a 3-prong to 2-prong adapter, plugged into a screw-in 2-prong adapter, plugged into a screw-in socket light switch, plugged into a socket that was then E-taped with a couple of nuts up to a wire that then went down some wall I couldn't find. So, you know, just be aware that not everybody wires to code when you buy a house. This was found actually in 3 different locations. They not only did this once, but they did it 3 times. I'm not really sure what they were thinking. They clearly could have just skipped the middleman here and just plugged this directly into this. Or maybe just put a box on the end, I don't know. Or just cut the cord and just wire nutted it directly into the cord. This is fascinating to me as to what they were thinking when they did that. Whoops. So when I was all done, I had this 2 by 2 foot grid. And you can see here, I ended up with the white flat panel LEDs. These are color temperature changeable from 3,000 to 4,500 to 6,000, I believe, with a 3, or 5,500, something like that. I ended up going with a middle of the road for this because these are essentially my work lights for the room. My generic, very, very even light across the room. My pictures are a little tough to see, but the light itself that it produces when you go in this room, it's almost blinding. It's so bright, to the point where I had to add a 10-volt dimmer to put them on a dimmer for when I just wanted to go in the room. They were really, really bright. But anywhere I work in the room, I have perfectly flat lighting to work on things. And you can see the only one I skipped is here because my bench is here. And this is essentially what will be a hallway around. It's an around the room layout. So the layout will be under this area and then under this area over here. So I didn't really need any lights in this area over by the bathroom door. Over by my workbench, however, I did, instead of putting this light near the bathroom where it wouldn't have done me any good, I moved it over a tile. And so these 3 lights are right over my workbench, except for where my monitors are, which are basically over here, under this shadow. This is before I put my desk in. But this light is just, I have to tell you, I'm working on a tugboat for one of our modules, and I can't believe how good the light has been and what a difference having a real workbench with real lighting has made to my modeling and ease of modeling. So you can see here how the lights are out from the wall so that when my monitors are under these shelves over here, they're going to be well protected. And of course, you know, just in case, I have my 8-track and my cassette deck and my turntable. So if I ever get in the mood for some Tom Jones or something like that, I'll have a place to play that when I get those in. And I'll add 2 ceiling speakers up here at some point. I haven't quite gotten there yet. The paneling is still up because, well, I didn't get that far yet. And the paneling is going to get covered up anyway, so it wasn't worth taking out at this stage. So that's what I have in my basement right now. I'm still working on the layout lighting. I haven't gotten that far yet, but I'm working on it. So here's our next section. Let's talk about actually lighting the layout. Windows, oh, the bane of our existence. Because if you've got a window, it really kind of defines the color temperature of your space already. So depending upon the type of layout and when you operate it, you really need to think about that window. If you operate your layout mostly during daytime hours, you're not a night owl, you like to run it during the day when it's brighter and using that window light, then really the lighting you put in the room should be daylight to match that outside light. You will find that it looks better on your layout. Here's another solution. A gentleman put in blinds, hard blinds, which really essentially it lets them block the windows out to complete darkness, in which case then they can light their future. This is the Mian, I believe, Mian it's called? Yes, the structured benchwork project. So having the ability to open the blinds when you want to work on the layout, but then close them to basically full shut when you're operating the layout. Great, going to work out great for them going forward. We've all seen trains around the top of a ceiling of a room. And what do you normally see when they do that? Nothing, because the train is in total darkness as it goes around the ceiling because it's 6 inches down from the ceiling. Well, the good news is now you could actually put strip lights along the edge here and light that train up so that as it goes around, it's all lit up without lighting up your room. So you'd still have your nice room light, but you could actually light the train a little bit better now. So windows, we talk about single level or multi-level. That's a key consideration when you're designing the lighting for your room. If you've got a single level layout, your normal ceiling height is going to be just fine for mounting all your lighting in. If your layout doesn't matter the size, if it's a small layout or even a huge layout, I don't need to bring lighting down to 8 feet above this layout. I can have it 20 feet up. I'm going to get a nice even light throughout the whole room by doing that. In this case, they went with spotlights because the layout goes almost floor to ceiling. That's a much tougher ceiling light layout than others, and in which case they're going to do a more traditional spotted highlighted layout. So again, single layout, open ceiling, plenty of room to hang lights, plenty of room to get. Now the room looks funky in the lighting here, but if you look at the layout is very evenly lit around the layout over here as well. Very, very evenly lit. So the light no longer detracts from the layout. It actually emphasizes the layout. When we go into a multi-layer layout, this is a great example of a multi-layer where they used LED lighting, but the LED lighting was both installed under on the lower levels and on the upper levels. So you got a very similar color temperature all the way around the layout, very flat lighting all the way across the layout, even in these dark spots. Remember that first picture I showed you had those dark trees and stuff? This is very well lit all the way around where the track is running. You're not going to have a problem seeing anything going on in the tracks with lighting like that. I particularly like this one. This really shows the emphasis that having those fascia board colors and having that nice even lighting as you go around the layout really helps make the layout itself pop and lets the room stop being a distraction and make the layout the attraction in the room. That's really the reason I included that one. Again, same here. Very nice, even lighting all the way across. No shadows, no harsh hot spots and dark spots. And because of that, it's just like the real sun. We get a very even light along our backdrop, and this backdrop actually looks better and blends better with our foreground pieces because there's no shadows there. There's no artificial shadow from this building because a light is pushing down on it, showing up on this backdrop and basically blowing the whole image of the backdrop. So again, the more even light, the better the layout is going to look regardless of the scenery type. So here's this layout where there's tall scenery and flat scenery and the background, but again, very well, very evenly lit. You can see darks and shadows in the rocks, but they're purposely there. They're not there because of lighting issues. So the track itself is very, very consistently lit all the way around the layout. Those are some great examples of well-lit layouts. Power. Keep in mind what type of lighting you are going to need when planning the power for your layout room. It's way easier to put lighting in before you start laying track and scenery. Trying to put lighting in your room or add a work light over your yard after you've already put scenery on the layout is really, really difficult. It's much easier to do that up front. And then we talk about valances and sight lines. So, and I apologize if this is a little small, but what we're showing here is this is a 70-inch tall person. So on a multi-tiered layout, there's a viewing angle that if we were to draw a straight line from their eye, past the valance, past the lower level here, you would see that even though there's brackets here, the eye level, you would not see those because they're well within, out of eyesight, because the eye line is somewhere in this area. So lighting up here is going to light this, not light back here, and the combination of that with the viewing angle is going to give you a really strong, realistic view of the layout. Same thing up here. The eye is not going to get attracted to up here because the light is here aiming down, so the focus is going to be much lower on the layout. And we'll talk about questions on this afterwards here. So here's a nice example of a single layout, single level layout, or the upper level of a layout. So you've got your hallway lighting or your aisleway lighting. You've got a fascia coming down. The person's head would be somewhere around this height here. So if we've got LED lights, because of their nature, we don't get hot spots like we do with traditional lights. So they can go right here on the fascia. They're going to light this really nice, and we can just put in a solid tile above it to keep dust off our layout. If we go with a traditional light, this happens to be a fluorescent, but we could do track lighting or any of a number of lights up here. Then what we're going to do is put in a light dissipating panel above it. And that's going to help even out that light so we don't get as many hot spots down here as we would with a traditional, if this was not here. So that's a great way to protect that and also keep the dust off the layout at the same time. Excuse me. Getting back to the angle. The angle and your height is going to play a big role in this, of course, because every person is standing at a different height looking at this from a different angle. So these are some traditional deck heights that are suggested in numerous publications. So a 65-inch, you'll notice they really can see all underneath this upper deck. That's not so great. That's going to distract from what's going on here. If they drop that lower deck to 55 inches, that same person all of a sudden has a sight line block with their valance. And if you do the same thing up here, you can block up to the top of where your painted backdrop is. So that's going to give you a really nice focus on the layout portion and not a focus on all the support brackets and the extra lighting and all the other type of stuff. And vice versa, if you get too low or you start really getting down there, again, you start to actually lose the backdrop from that same point of view, standing at the same distance from the layout. So, but you get more of a view of the upper deck. So there's a compromise somewhere between this picture and this picture and this picture, depending upon your height, what you're comfortable working at, and where your emphasis is. Some people, the upper deck is space to run, but not necessarily their scenic spectacular. They're more focused on the lower deck scenery and operations. So the lower deck is more critical. Sometimes you need more space between them because you've got more mountainous scenery down here versus up here where you have much smaller spaces. This one I just kind of laughed at when I found it. This was a museum exhibit plan, and they had service lights. So these are your fluorescents up on the ceiling for when you want to do work in the room. Then they had track lighting for lighting and highlighting the space. Then they had 60-watt red, green, blue, and white bulbs to sit and light the layout. Then they put pin spots in to highlight parts of the layout in addition to that. Then they added LED strips to add more light to the bottom. Then they put lights behind the buildings. They added strobe lights up here so that they could have thunder and lightning effects. They added ultraviolet lights up in here so that when they wanted to go to nighttime, it would change the color. Then they added a smoke machine for fog and mist that's then piped down so that they can create weather effects. And they added speakers and a subwoofer for sound effects. That's a lot of stuff to think about in a single level of a layout. Now, most of us are not building this type of museum exhibit, but if you've got rolling thunder, you've got speakers up in these spaces that you need to put around your room and a subwoofer somewhere in the room that's coupled to the walls. You do want different types of light for different effects. You will have lights behind the buildings and lights behind the scenery to create those sunrise, sunset things. So I don't know how many of us, I honestly don't know of anybody with a fog machine on their layout yet, but maybe after tonight, if one of you decides to go there, let me know and we'll take a picture of it for my next update. This is a great example of what a valance can do for your layout. It totally points the eye and the focus of the layout and where you're looking. With the all black down here and the black here, the valance and the black down here act like a frame for our layout, like a picture frame. And now the layout itself is extremely well lit, very evenly lit. So you got no dark shadows, very well lit in this area, right from the edge, which is why they brought the valance out to here. It looks like somebody caught their head on it. But why they brought the valance all the way out was to make sure that they have lighting here and here. And the valance follows this front edge of the layout. So it's a very clean look, very well lit, really makes you focus on the layout. Here's one under construction. Again, when you're dealing with lighting in a layout room, it's a hell of a lot easier to do that before you start building the bulk of your layout. You really want to get your bench work in to define your layout and then get all your lighting and your ceiling structure and your backdrop painting in. I think Pete Watson was adding backgrounds in after the structure, and I remember him telling us that was quite painful trying to do it after the fact. So highly recommend you get your backdrops and your backdrop painting in before you start doing your foreground track laying scenery. It's tough to think that far ahead, but it really does make a big difference. Here's a good example of it being built. So again, they finished their ceiling. Their ceiling lighting for the upper level is already in place behind here. They've got their mid-level, their upper level layout with looks like about 3 inches of foam to allow them to contour the base foam and mount things. They've got the shelf that's sitting on. Then there's more LED lighting. Again, they're using strip lighting here underneath. So they got a very nice even light on the whole layout. And you can tell this is going to be really well done when they're done. So notice a little bit of extra support up here for the valance. Then they don't need to put anything on the bottom if they use a masonite like this. They can just use the top piece and the masonite will bend enough. But you can see where this is going. This is going to be really well lit and very focused on the layout when it's done. Here's an example somewhat of what not to do later. You really want to make sure that all of these wires underneath are all tucked up and in. So when you finish this upper layer, really do a spot check to make sure that you've got everything tucked up and in, because nothing will ruin the view on this lower level than having a loop of wire hanging down in the middle of your sky. So try to make sure you've got that stuff tucked up, and not just with double stick tape. Use screws with little clips. Here you can see they have nighttime lighting in place on the upper level. Looks great. This is going to look fantastic as well. Real nice valance, a little thicker on the valance to allow them to cut into it for valleys and stuff. Really well done. Very, very strong start to a layout. Although I am concerned, whoops, let me go back a couple here. The one thing I was concerned about is the mouse hole back here, whether that's really for mice or hopefully he's got a train going that way at some point in the future. So here's one where it's a much lighter color layout, more of a Western theme. But again, the valance and the matching color really do a lot to frame your focus on the layout. Again, well lit, even lighting all the way around the layout. LED lighting again. Eventually they'll add curtains down here to hide all that. It's a really well lit scene, very evenly lit. So this one is interesting. It's evenly lit, but one of the problems I have with it is it's so high that your eye focus doesn't stay on the scenery. It really rides up to all this mess of stuff up here in the layout. And I think that's one of the things when you're dealing with multi-level layouts to be aware of is that top layout, your sight line is going to be vertical. It is going to be an angle like this. And you really need to finish everything so that it's clean within that sight line. Make sure that you have gotten it here. Don't just tuck this track up as tight as you can to get a third layer in. It's really going to take away from it in the long run. So these are a few of my favorite products that I've been using. I've had pretty good luck with. They're available at Amazon, Home Depot. You Do It Electronics sells a lot of these as well, of the LED stuff as well, the strip lights and whatnot. Read the ads carefully. Not all LEDs are the same. Many are not dimmable. Some of them require very specific control systems. So just read carefully before you purchase or make sure they have a nice return policy. These were panels that I bought. You get 2 panels. They run about $70 each. I'm sorry, $60 each, give or take. They were 2x2s. They also make them in a 2x4. I could not figure out the difference between the premium and the standard for $8. I honestly I must have read the ads a dozen times each and I could not find the difference in the end. So I just bought the standard and they seemed to be just fine at $57, free shipping. Life was good. The panels were nice. They were well built. They're hardwired. They were color changing. So they did all the different, with a little switch on the side, you could change whatever color temperature you wanted the lights to be. They came with a lot of options that you could buy separately. You could buy a wall switch where you could adjust the color temperature and presets. They also sold a wireless remote control option where you could have all your presets on there and walk around the room hitting them. They made a wall panel where you could actually put them on a wall. I don't know why, but maybe somebody would. And they also made a ceiling hanging kit where if you wanted to mount them up underneath a layout, you could mount them up underneath and they mounted easily there. So that was a great package. I really was very happy with those. They're not the only ones on the market. They're just one that I found after a trial and error that met everything I was looking for. These were RGB strip lights. They're pretty cool. And for 36 bucks, you get, 82 feet. However, their white was not very white. It was a little bit off on the way they were generating the white. But what was really cool was it came with an app for your phone that you could then sit and mix the color to anything you wanted and then save it as a preset that you could then recall. And that was really slick. So what I liked about them was using them for the moonlight effect and the evening lighting and that sunrise sunset where I wanted a more golden color instead of the pure white or before I went into the yellow towards the white. And then on the moonlight, I could go to the more purple and blue color to get that more blue light. And they were on sale at the time for $35 for 80 feet of lighting with the power supply and everything. It doesn't get much cheaper than that. But again, if you type up LED strip lights, there's about 700 products that come up on Amazon alone. So make sure you read about them. Make sure they've got a great free return policy. If you don't like them when you plug them in, you return them and buy something else. but expect to do trial and error. You were asking about retrofit lights earlier. This is one of the ones that I've had some experience with. These are 4-inch. They also make a 5 and a 6-inch. These lights come with a box where you wire your hard wire into, and then they have a little 12-inch extension between the box and the LED, which makes them easy to mount up in a ceiling. They are only a 1/2 inch thick. So even if you have to mount one of these in a place where you have a ceiling stud directly over where you want the light, you can still get one of these in there because it's no thicker than the drywall that you have on your wall, on your ceiling. So you can cut out a hole, excuse me, pass the wire through the hole up to the box up in the attic or up in the ceiling, and you can certainly extend this. There's plenty of ways to extend this. These connectors are very standardized, so you can extend these up to about 25 feet. So you could literally bring all these boxes over into a closet and line them all up, do it that way. And then you can either drill a 4 3/4 inch or a 6-inch hole, and all that holds it in the ceiling are these 2 little clips. And there's about a 1/16 inch rim that shows. So great, great retrofit lights if you have down lighting anywhere in your room that you want to change out. Very flat lighting, not spotlight, very, very flat. At about there's a couple of calculations you can do online that'll tell you how far apart they need to be to get even lighting at a certain distance. You just need to look at those specs, and every light is going to be different. These are cool lights. These are LED lights. We just ordered 60 of these or 80 of these for the Museum of Science. They come from Micromark, $24 for 20 lights, and they're LED. They already have the resistors built in. Plug them into 8 to 16 volts, and voila, you have lights. They're that simple. You can put these all in parallel. If you want them half light, you can put a couple in series. They're great lights. They come with a little 12-inch lead, so that'll get you down through a bench work. They're grain of wheat size, but they're clear LEDs. So they're really, really neat. Easy to use. They come with a sticky base, so you can just peel the sticker off and stick them inside your building and get real quick lighting inside a building. And they're good for just about any scale, obviously. We were talking about Just Plug was mentioned earlier. I have to tell you, this is not one of the cheapest solutions out there, but if you are not an electrician and you are not into wiring, you are into scenery and you are into operations, but the wiring part scares you, it doesn't get any easier than this. You can buy their buildings with the lights already in them. You can buy your own lights to put into buildings. You can put a sequencing hub on it where it will turn the lights on and off on a sequence. You can have multiple light hubs, and this thing is exponentially expandable. I believe you can have up to 3 expansion hubs before you need another power supply. So plenty of room for growth. You can have this over in one area. You can have this same setup over in another area. It just doesn't get any simpler for adding building lights. There's no LED voltages to calculate. There's no resistors to figure out. It's flip a switch, turn the sequencing on, and voila, you have building lights on your layout, or street lights, or whatever type of lighting you need. They now make automobiles that plug into this with headlights and tail lights. So I give them a lot of credit. They took a piece of the hobby that people just hated, and they made it about as simple as you could have in that world. So great product, but as with anything, good, fast, cheap, this is good and fast. So therefore it's not cheap. So keep that in mind as you go forward. So now I'm going to go back here. I'm going to open this back up to questions. I know you guys probably have a ton of questions on that. If we need to go back, let me know. Just unmute yourself to ask a question or raise your hand and I can call you out if I see you. No question. Oh, James. Mute. James, unmute.
I was
There we
hoping
go.
my mute button was doing the job. I got a demo of a Just Plug compatible product here. Let's see if I've got it pointed right.
Yeah, I see buildings.
And over at the end, you see a Crafton Avenue gas station. And that is the Roomettes lighting, the right out of the box Roomettes lighting, which is supposed to be compatible with Just Plug. And I'm going to turn off the room lights for a second. I hope you'll be able to see it. It is pretty bright. This is more of my layout illuminated at night. So one of the things is before you make a big commitment to Just Plug, you should do a little sampling, because just connecting everything up, you can buy those JST 2.5 millimeter connectors on, from wherever on the internet, and you don't have to get deeply involved with their power supplies. But if it turns out you want to dim, you're going to want to dim most or all of your stuff, you're spending $15 for a 4-port dimmer. That's all.
Yeah, so like anything, again, very effective, great product, but you're going to pay a little bit for it for that convenience of plug and play. That's the catch. Any other questions? Yes, Andy, unmute.
So we haven't mentioned anything about lighting up modules, and I remember Larry Madsen and Jerry have some around. Have you any comments on that little board that Larry sells?
Yeah, so the modules themselves do carry an accessory bus for powering accessories, lighting included, building lighting, trees, whatever you want to light and power off the accessory bus. That bus is independent of the track buses. It's actually on a whole separate transformer and everything. So if somebody plugs in something stupid, it won't take out the layout. So that is on every module. As far as lighting above the modules, I think the general, like the Eastern, European train enthusiasts actually do lighting above their module. You've seen them at the show with the green layout, and they have lighting that's actually up above their module. It does make it pop, but it is one more piece of the puzzle you need to set up. And I think in general, with few room exceptions, we haven't really seen a problem with the amount of light on our layout, other than maybe on occasion at Greenberg when we're in the red room there, where there's like no light on one side of the layout and enough light to light up Chicago on the other side. So we go up and we can kind of tweak the lights a little bit sometimes when we're in there. But generally speaking, our modular group does not support external powered lighting other than physical accessory lighting on the module. But there's not many limits to what you can do with that. If you've ever seen Dick Ball's Grand Central Terminal module, I think he must have 300 lights on that, between the lights underneath and the subway and the station and the buildings and the skyscrapers. They all light up, and there's lights in all the windows. Just a tremendous amount, not counting all the street lights and traffic lights that he's got on the module. I think there are 16 traffic lights, each with 3 LEDs in each direction. So it's a lot of lighting, and he hasn't come close to any issues with the accessory bus with our modules. I do think if you're doing a large room layout, yeah, you need to keep in mind at some point you need to size your power supplies correctly for all this lighting and all these accessory lighting. It's pretty rare you're going to come anywhere near exceeding it unless you're like Rod Stewart trying to build all of Chicago on your layout, where you might run into a power problem at some point. I think the buildings that they built for the Museum of Science, if you've seen the Prudential building, I mean, this is almost a 4-foot tall building, and there's actually only one light bulb in that whole building, and it lights up that building beautifully. All the floors look great, and the lights are cut out, and it looks fantastic. They did a great job, and that's only a single light bulb in that whole building.
can you use those woodland scenic lights on a module with our accessory bus?
I believe the answer is yes, because it's a DC power supply, but you may need to build a custom circuit or buy one of our 12-volt circuits to put in line with it. Yeah, Jerry's shaking his head. So yeah, we have a 12-volt accessory power supply circuit that you can mount under your layout. It's only, I forget, under 20 bucks, 10 bucks.
It's 12. Okay, we've got actually three. We've got a 9-volt power supply, a 5-volt power supply, and a 12-volt power supply. The 9 and the 5 are $25 built, and then the 12-volt one, very simple little kit to build. There's 4 diodes, 1 resistor, a couple of caps, and the trigger, the module that makes it all work with the heat sink. And that you can assemble that all in about, if you're really slow at soldering, it might take you a half hour to build the darn thing. But that's 12 bucks. All right.
So not too bad, pretty easy. And with that, then you could power the Just Plug lighting system. Excuse me, sorry, voice is going.
Just on one of the comments on what Shaq said about Dick Ball's Union Station module with all those LEDs, he's actually using one 12-volt power supply to power all that, because our AC bus is a 18-volt AC bus that we have running around the layout. I forget how many watts behind that silly bus line these days, but there's more than enough power to power anything we need to power off of. And we can power as many of those, 5, 9, or 12-volt power supplies.
Not a problem. So there's really no, in answer to your question, Andy, yes, you can use the Just Plug with it. You will need an adapter circuit so you don't have to plug into AC, which you'd want to do anyway because you don't want to run an AC cord to your module. And then from there, you can power as many as you need to.
No, that's good information.
Yeah, you actually don't want to run an AC power cord. You can't run one pretty much under the layout to power your stuff. So
plus, we never have enough outlets in the rooms.
Well, it's not so much that in Massachusetts anyway. Well, nationally, it's a violation of the National Electric Code. You got to be very, very careful because you can't run an extension off an extension, things of that nature. And the fire departments do check that stuff periodically. We never know when.
Any other questions? Anybody? Yes, Scott.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Let's say you wanted to do a afternoon layout, and you wanted shadows. How would you address that?
Well, when you say you want shadows, are you talking like a late afternoon?
You have a tree and you want to see the shadow of the tree.
Well, you're certainly going to get that with LED lighting, with bright white lights. You will get shadows under the trees from above.
Well, from above.
Whether it's going to give you that 6-foot stretch shadow that you're thinking of, and I think that's where you're kind of asking here. So the only way you're going to do that is to put a more directed, what I'll call it a pin spot, but essentially it's a beam of light that is much more focused. And
exactly.
They make LEDs that do have that kind of light. And
but how would you do
one of those? I'm sorry.
How would you do a whole layout though that way?
It would get really expensive really quickly. But I would tend to say you're probably only going to need to do that to a few foreground trees that are going to stand out anyway, because those are the trees that are going to have all the detail. The one that comes to mind is if you've ever seen James's Rowley layout, he's got that beautiful, I want to say it's an oak. He'll probably correct me. I don't think it's an oak tree, but it's a big, beautiful tree he did out of the copper wire with a wire trunk that he formatted. It's a gorgeous tree. And that's the kind of tree, I would love to put a light on that to let it cast that long shadow it would really actually stand out on the layout just by itself because of the nature of the tree and the size of it.
Okay.
Jack, if my last demo came across okay visually, I could show what I'm doing here with the Rowley modules. I've got my lights on.
Sure.
Okay, so the basic lighting setup looks like this. I've got T1, T8 fluorescence, and I've put the fixtures on the ceiling aimed at the layout here. And with that, they're located just in front of the front edge of the layout. I didn't really make a fascia because I have some friends who are too tall for this ceiling and they just bang their heads on it. So when you come to the scene like Rowley here, there are shadows, but they aren't really sharp shadows. I'm trying to model kind of a cloudy, bright light, if you remember the old Kodak directions. And so there are some shadows, but they aren't super sharp. And that's one approach you can take if you don't want to do all the pin spots.
So you will get shadows. It's not that you won't get them, but if you really want that long afternoon shadow, the only way to achieve that, because our rooms are too close to our light sources, the only way you're going to truly achieve that is with individual lights on individual objects. And you're right, that could get expensive and painfully complicated quickly to get it. But throw a couple of those on a few foreground objects and you could quickly create the illusion of what time of day it is, that it's a late afternoon, you know, about to head towards sunset. I think it would look good. Any other questions? Anybody else? No, all quiet. That's it. I think we've hit our limit.
Bruce, what do you want? Can you unmute? I see Bruce waving. Hold on.
I'm unmuted.
We got you now.
All right. 4 points. Point number 1. Jack, that has got to be the finest lighting presentation I've ever seen in the 40 years I was in the friggin' business. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Put it right on the table so everybody can understand how lighting works. Beautiful. Nice presentation.
Thank you.
Number 2, Jerry intimated. When I see you go into people's basements and there's no ceiling and you look up, I'm sorry, I was in the business for 40 years. My heart stops when I see some of the 120-volt wiring that people will do. So I want to plead with everybody, don't be stupid. I know most of you work on the right-hand side of the decimal point, and I work on the left. But at the 120-volt level and above, you really need to follow the codes and do it properly. There's several reasons for it, one of which is you don't die and you don't burn the house down.
Yeah, this was shocking when I opened the ceiling up and saw this. I nearly fell over. I just was like, it's amazing the house didn't burn down before. I was glad I started remodeling the house in that room instead of other places.
Oh, the things I have seen over the years that make you cry. Just one point, I think there's a little bit of a fine point of discussion here. You talk about LEDs and you talk about light fixtures. You need to separate those two thoughts out a little bit. A LED, like an incandescent lamp, like a fluorescent lamp, like a halogen lamp or an HID lamp, they're a point source. That's the source of the light. Now, what are you going to do with it? You're going to put it in something, and the something is called the fixture. Shaq, you had pictures of surface-mounted fluorescents. You had downlights.
Flat panels.
You had some your own 2x2s. All those fixtures are designed for specific purposes, and they all have different lighting distributions.
Yes.
There's a all kinds of technical manuals out there that'll give you the photometrics of every one of those fixtures. It's kind of beyond what we need to know about, but be aware there is a way to predict how many fixtures you need in a given space. Most of the manufacturers, if you dig far enough and deep enough, I think you'll be able to find their recommended practices, if you will. And the other part of it is the effect that color has. I'll give you an example. Many gazillion years ago, I did a lighting design in Combustion Engineering's headquarters building in Stamford, Connecticut. It was the serving area, the kitchen, and the dining area. Went down to a job meeting one day, went to lunch, walked into the serving area with my tray to get my lunch. And as soon as I entered the door, I said, "They're gonna fire me." You could not see the hand in front of your face here in this space. It was like walking into a closet with the lights out. Really, I was mortified. Did not know why at first. Later, I walked into the kitchen. You could do brain surgery in here. Cooks were happy, everything was fine. You see everything in any place. Walked out to the dining area, same thing. Beautiful, perfect, everything is perfect. The light was colored, everything was beautiful. So what's wrong with the serving area? If you've ever dealt with an interior designer, these people can undo every design that a lighting guy can come up with. In this case, we had a very young girl in our office that was trying to make a name for herself as an interior designer. So, black ceiling tiles, dark navy blue textured wall coverings, deep red quarry tile on the floor. Can you say black hole? Lighting and audio have very similar characteristics. You can, if you put light into a given space, the amount of light your eye perceives is a function of the colors in the space. There's no mystery why ceiling tiles are white, because the lighting system uses the ceiling as a reflective surface so that the light bounces around inside the space and it gives you that nice even illumination that we're all looking for. So a word of caution, if you paint the ceiling flat black and you paint the walls flat black, there's not enough light fixtures in your budget to light that space so you can see it. So on general areas like ceilings, walls, try to go on the lighter colors for you because your lighting system would respond better.
In part of response to your question there, this is a one brand in particular, but this is available for many. Yep. These are all the same brand of LED fixture from the same manufacturer, but depending upon which fixture you buy from them, the dispersion pattern of that light is very, very different. And I think this is kind of what you were alluding to, Bruce, that you really have to read the specs of any particular light before you buy a lot of them. Or, as I said, be thankful for Amazon in that you can go and buy a light and check it out and see how close it matches the spec in your space and go, nah, not right. Free returns, throw it back in the box and buy the next one up or the next one down until you find that type of light that fits your particular layout space in your design. But yeah, the dispersion of that light also has a lot to do with how that light is manufactured, the way it's manufactured, the type of coating they put on the LEDs for heat dispersion. There's about 30 or 40 different factors that go into it. But the bottom line is the manufacturer's specs will tell you at 6 feet, it'll produce a beam this wide with this much light output or this many lumens. So you think about a 30 watt, a 60 watt, a 90 watt bulb. That's really what that's measuring is the lumens in a sense. That's the power that it draws, but what it's also representing is the amount of brightness that bulb can generate. So when you read those specs, you can say, well, this bulb produces X amount of lumens at this distance in a beam this wide. And then that tells you how many lights you need to place in a row and how far apart those lights need to be to get a flat light at 6 feet or 4 feet or 3 feet off the ground. So yeah, a lot of information. Lighting is, there's many people that make whole careers out of lighting, but and most of them drive us television engineers completely nuts with their color changing lights. But as far as layouts go, it's a lot simpler. What's really nice though, keep in mind, you're going to want work lights for your room, layout lights for your room, and lights over your bench. That's the three basics. You need to light the track and scenery, and you need to have work lights so that you can turn the room up bright and do work on the layout without trying to figure out what you're doing in the dark.
One last tip is, and again, if you go back to the 120 volt level, it's really a good idea. If you're doing lighting in a basement space, for example, all your lighting should be on a different circuit than anything else. You know, if you got receptacles in the wall at the basement level that your layout's plugged into, your workbench is plugged in, that should be a different circuit from your lighting.
Yeah, I believe lighting is required by code to be on a separate circuit.
That's right.
Now, certainly any upgrades, it may not be on it in an older house, but by code, any new lighting has to be on its own circuit because all your wall outlets and everything have to be arc protected now, and that's why it's separate. One of the reasons it's separated now. But you want that anyway, and that's why I said when you're designing the lighting of your room, and I know it's not as much fun as designing the scenery and designing the track plan and all those other cool things, but when you're thinking about lighting, think about multiple circuits of lighting. Lighting for your operation, lighting for your work area, lighting for your overall layout room, and lighting for the work area in your layout room. And also to keep in mind that if you are going to do nighttime operations on your layout, which is really cool. I mean, it looks great. The engine lights are on, the caboose lights, the flasher on the rear. All those things look really cool running around in the dark. We've all done it. You should also keep in mind your operators may not be familiar with your space, and in which case you may want a small strip light along the floor of LEDs that are just bright enough to light the aisleway up so that they know where the aisles are and where you know, that bump out you did so you could put the coal yard right there. Yeah, you know, that hurts it at 8 o'clock at night when you walk into it in the dark. So those little things like that, those help a lot in that area. Things to think about anyway.
Yeah, Shaq, if I could, echo what Bruce said, that this has been a really great presentation. You really covered the topic, and fun fact, I took a illumination engineering course in college and had to learn the math behind everything you just talked about. And there's a lot of math.
There's a lot of math. There's a lot of math there.
It's interesting. It's fascinating, but yeah, it was a tough class. But there's the good news is there is solid information behind what you're saying. So there's, the high confidence that it will work.
Yeah, honestly, if you go, I say Amazon, but whatever your preferred shopping platform is, you can type in LED, downlight, color temperature, whatever, and 200 results will pop up for it. You can type in 2x2 drop-in ceiling, LED, color temperature adjustable, and 40 more results will show up. You can really narrow it down pretty quick to get exactly the type of light you need. In my case, I wanted a color adjustable 2x2 drop-in ceiling tile, and that's what I ended up finding that met my needs. Was it a little more than, some of the cheaper stuff? Yes, but the color temperature switching capability was important to me, and I wanted to have that control over my room lighting, and the fact that my fixtures are dimmable from 10% to 100%. Most LEDs can't dim below 10%. There's just some math, as he says, there's math behind it that basically that's the limit. So you're never going to get the room darker than about 10% of the total light output. But that light output's going to vary. That 10% is going to be a big difference depending upon the type of fixture you use. So if you are looking for a dimmable fixture, make sure it's dimmable. A lot of them are not. Make sure that the dimmer you bought is compatible with those LED fixtures. Most of the LED dimmable fixtures require special LED dimmers that have a separate 10 volt, 0 to 10 volt output control to drive the dimming function independently. So not only do you have to wire all the 120 volt to all the fixtures, you then have to run this 10 volt connection around all the fixtures, and both of those wires have to come back down the wall to your dimmer, where you can then have full dimmer control over them. So just some things to keep in mind as you look at it. Yes, James.
The issue with operating in the dark, I do it up here by myself for fun. I haven't had that many op sessions. Maybe Bruce's operators, maybe his regular crew could run that layout on building lighting and headlights and so on and so forth. But nobody knows my layout like me. I can run it in the dark. I'm not going to expect anybody else they can watch, but I'm not sure they'll want to run.
Yeah. It depends on what when I say night operations, if you're running a big crew, night operations probably means you're dimming the lights 50%, not 70 or 80% in the room, because you still got to read your cards. Although it would be a lot of fun to walk around with a lantern trying to read a car card and then try to find that card somewhere on the yard with a flashlight, with a little miniature flashlight. But, it just, there's so many aspects to this hobby. There you go. I can see it in your yard now with a little light going car by car, trying to find the car numbers at night. It just adds a different aspect to it, running at night or running in the dark. And you should consider not only the lighting on the layout when you want to do that, but safety lighting for the aisleways and such as well. That's all.
The train crews of that era were quite sure that they had a better job than the yard operators, than the yard clerks, even though the yard clerks got to go home at the same time every day and sleep in their own bed. They were sure they liked their job better.
Well, that's all I have. Certainly entertain any more questions. Anybody have any other questions? No? Well, thank you, everybody.
Okay, so thanks everybody for coming to our virtual clinic again. And I want to thank other people that are here, Bill Roach, Bill Barry, Steve Erickson from Little Rhodey, and the rest of us all for even not participating by talking, but at least being here and enjoying seeing your friends. And hopefully at some point soon we'll be able to get back together again. Then the other thing I just want to mention is make sure to stay tuned for the third Friday of each month, because next month we've got Doug Scott doing something on his trips on to see 150th anniversary steam engine show, and that should be fun. And then we have Lou Sassy. Thanks to Mike Tyler for helping get Lou Sassy over. He's going to speak in December. And yes, we are having something in December because we're not having a holiday party. And he'll be doing something on trees. And then we've got our own Russ Norris here, who's going to speak in January about how he got to get his MMR. So I'm not going to go any further than that, but we still have a good season going on. And we are trying as a group to get people from further away, if at all possible, to participate, because usually it's always an issue trying to get good speakers who live far away. But with this Zoom, we're certainly able to sort of grab some good speakers. Look, point here, Shaq.
Yeah, I have
600 miles away.
Yeah, I'm in Atlanta right now giving this, so I'm glad I was able to do this still. And I will see you guys up in November for the Museum of Science layout. I'll still be coming up to help configure that. I did want to show one more thing here real quick.
Okay.
In my own layout, which I'm still in the design stage with here, and you can see my room here, and then my land rights in the next room that I got. But what I wanted to show you was I am going through that process right now of adjusting the heights of my layouts, and these are not set in stone in any way yet. But again, using the 6 foot tall person, looking at my sight lines for the different levels and trying to adjust that and figure out what that looks like and what the overall heights, like around the turnarounds at the far end of the layout, what they're going to look like relative height wise with my scenery that I plan on doing. So I've been figuring all that out, and all of those things. So like there's a section here, if we were to slice this part of the layout, this is actually what I'm looking at right now, from the ceiling, the floor, and what that actually looks like at that point. So, and once I have this stuff finished, then I'll figure out my valance heights and my lighting for each of these levels as needed. So that's what I'm in the process of doing now as I'm starting to figure out. So where you saw those 3 lights over my workbench, that was over in this area. And then the other lights you saw were actually over the layout out here, out in this area. So just wanted to share that quickly. That's why I'm talking lighting, because that's what I'm trying to figure out right now.